Wow, that's an amazing welcome. Thank you very much, everybody. I wanted to read you just a few lines from Parker Palmer's Let Your Life Speak. He's writing about autumn and paradox. And because it is autumn, let me just give you this for a few moments. He's talking about paradox. And he says, in a paradox, opposites do not negate each other. They cohere in mysterious unity at the heart of reality. So there's so many seemingly paradoxical things about our life, and yet they don't have to be negating each other. And he talks about autumn as being, a season of paradox. He says, autumn constantly reminds me that my daily dyings are necessary precursors to new life. If I try to make a life that defies the diminishments of autumn, the life I end up with will be artificial at best and utterly colourless as well. But when I yield to the endless interplay of living and dying and living, the life I am given will be real and colourful, fruitful and whole. So here's to an autumn season that will be real and colourful, fruitful and whole. That was just all by way of bonus. There must be more to life than this, mustn't there? I mean, I don't mean this. This is wonderful, spending all day thinking about your favourite books and gathering around some crucial themes. But there must be more to work life, to home life, to church life even. And deep down, I think we all know it, don't we? For even as we are busy skimming the surface of our relationships and of our culture and of our faith, mercifully, something calls to us from below that surface. It's not always easy to say what it is. The poet Mary Oliver says that something whispered something. It's perhaps what the author Cynthia Bourgeault calls our nostalgia for the infinite. Lovely phrase. Or what the rock band U2 were touching on in their restlessly beautiful song, I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. And it's surely what the Bible reminds us of in Ecclesiastes when it says, God has set eternity in the hearts of all people. Something calls from deeper. We sense it perhaps when we catch the sun setting, or when we watch a child giggling infectiously, or perhaps indeed when we stand at a graveside. In such moments, I believe our soul stirs and we recall glimpses of that nagging sense of the mysterious more to life, which we know there must be. The more of who we are, for instance, created as image bearers of God. I love how the poet William Wordsworth puts it. At our birth, he writes, we arrive not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Trailing clouds of glory from God, who is our home. We spend so much of our time forgetting this, don't we? We spend most of our life forgetting where we've come from and who we are. But thankfully, just every now and again, we have our memories jogged. Recently, and I mentioned this in the start of Soulfulness, I was running through a nature reserve. And it was a beautiful sunny day, but out of the blue, huge black clouds came and it started absolutely pouring down with rain. feeling very sorry for myself at the time. And then I turned this corner, and just as I did, the sun came out, and I beheld this incredible double rainbow arching up over the water meadows. It was absolutely beautiful, and it stopped me dead in my tracks, or alive in my tracks, and reconnected me with a sense of the more of who I might be, the more of God's creation. It lifted me out of my own petty sense of grievances with the world and connected me to something bigger for a few beautiful moments. I suppose the great question, once we've had a taste of the divine like that, a divine sense of reconnection, really is, how do we stay alert and connected to the more, especially when the rainbow inevitably fades before our eyes and we go running back to busyness as usual? How do we stay connected and alert to the more? Well, personally, I have gained some really helpful insights from the mindfulness movement, which overlaps with much of what we might call contemplative Christian spirituality. And mindfulness actually helps me to understand more of the hidden treasures of my own faith. So just a few words on that first. Mindfulness through sustainable practices such as paying attention to our breathing and stepping into times of stillness and pause, and even just daring to do one thing at a time. Very hard in today's culture to do one thing at a time. It all helps us to be more alert and alive to this present moment and to the more that's contained within it, as well as as well as helping us to cope with stress, which is one of its most famous benefits, isn't it? So if you want a definition, think of its opposite for a moment and ask yourself what you have done mindlessly in the last few days. Can you remember your journey here? Or were you, like I often end up being, completely lost in thought, maybe having one of those hypothetical arguments in your head with somebody you haven't yet met, or, running through the way a meeting's going to go and it all turns out badly and you're just kind of going round and round in your head? Probably just me, I don't know. How did you drink your last cup of coffee a few moments ago? How did you drink it? Did you taste it? How did you listen when a friend was sharing something really significant for them in a moment of vulnerability? Did what they were saying trigger something for you that made you think, oh yeah, well actually that reminds me of a situation that I'm in, and take you off on a train of thought? Or were you able to give them your full attention, the gift of listening? Sometimes I catch myself, or perhaps I should say I used to catch myself, responding to a text that comes in when I'm reading the kids a bedtime story. John Kabat-Zinn, who is one of the sort of gurus of mindfulness, wrote a brilliant book called Wherever You Go, There You Are, which is a brilliant title. And sometimes I buy books just for the title. He describes mindfulness as wakefulness with open-hearted presence. Which is lovely, isn't it? Imagine if we were all a little more wakeful during our days and going through life with more open-hearted presence. Imagine the difference it could make to your day if those that you're going to meet today and later on were wakeful with open-hearted presence. Meditation is one way of becoming more wakeful with open-hearted presence. And I know that's a word that can press the wrong buttons for us sometimes. We feel a bit squeamish about that word. But the clergyman and clinical psychologist, Professor Mark Williams, refers to this very helpfully and undramatically as calmly abiding in the present moment. Calmly abiding in the present moment. And you don't have to sit cross-legged on a meditation mat for half an hour necessarily in order to calmly abide in the present moment. You might make yourself a cup of tea and step outside and give yourself permission. That's give yourself permission to do nothing but be for a few minutes instead of constantly doing. Most of us don't give ourselves that permission. And if you really need something to do during that time, try watching the clouds. Seriously, just try watching the clouds. There's a guy called Gavin Pretor-Pinney who is founder of the Cloud Appreciation Society. Just delivered a brilliant TED talk online about clouds. Wonderful. And he says that one of the most important things about watching clouds is that it gives you permission to do nothing more than watch clouds. Sometimes we need to do that in our culture. Otherwise, you might try taking a slower walk of awareness for once. Just try walking down a familiar road or high street, but more slowly. And I do this with people when I'm working one-to-one with them. I take them down Winchester High Street, which is a busy high street, and I get them to walk slower than normal walking pace. And it's amazing what you begin to notice when you do that, such as the voice in your head saying, "Help, help, I look completely stupid. What if I bump into somebody I know? What are people going to think of me?" And then you can stop and smile at that, notice it, and then just carry on. And then you begin to notice details on the pavement. And you notice things up there that you've never noticed before. And then you notice the details on people's faces. And there's almost like a different quality to the space around you all of a sudden, and you are present. So you can try that for free. It doesn't take much apart from a bit of guts. Why don't we just pause for a moment and do nothing but be still? You might like to close your eyes or just stare into space for a moment. Become aware of your breathing. Slow your breathing down a little. Deepen it. And just remember that you are here. That God is here. And that this breath is a gift. We are God-breathed. I went to do a talk at a big organisation, a big consultancy in London once that was wanting to find new and different ways to kind of connect and different ways into leadership. And I led them into a period of silence and was talking about soulfulness and spiritual intelligence and things like this, but led them into a period of 5 minutes silence in the middle of it. Took some guts to do it. And anyway, this guy comes up to me at the end and he says, "I'm not being funny or anything, mate, but the best thing about your talk tonight was when it was all completely silent." I think I took that as a compliment. We forget how powerful stillness and silence can be. So mindfulness can be very helpful and has so many benefits, from lower stress levels to increased creativity. But the danger, I think, is that we can end up seeing it as just another tool to calm us down within our frazzling lifestyle that we otherwise have no intention of changing. We just keep going, but we take some breaths. Or maybe we see it as a tool to help us to stay cool as we clamber over everyone else on the way to the top. The psychologist Bill Plotkin says that we should beware simply becoming better adapted cogs in the otherwise toxic machinery of life. I don't want to be a better adapted cog within the same toxic machinery. I want to become part of the solution, not the problem. Yes, mindfulness settles our minds, but don't we believe we are also so much more than calmed minds alone? And that's why I love to talk about soulfulness. Because I believe that once the mind has settled and stopped its constant, insecure chattering, we find ourselves standing on the threshold of something tantalizing and exquisite, of the more, of soul. And that's for me where it gets really, really exciting. I try to imagine sometimes what my kids might say to sum up my life, what they might write as my epitaph. And it would be great if they did say he was a really mindful dad, but that leaves me a little bit cold. I would be absolutely thrilled if they said he lived with soul. Think of that word for a moment, soul, and I wonder what you picture. Soul music, maybe. There was a brilliant program on Radio 4 on the way down today called Soul Music, and it was all about Sam Cooke's song, A Change Is Gonna Come. Sweet soul music, but brave soul music and dangerous soul music. Maybe you think of a soulful cafe or a soulful supper with friends, a soulful gallery space that inspires you, or a soulful stretch of the great outdoors. Puts a smile on my face just thinking about soul. You might like to ask yourself, when does your soul stir? In the Bible, in Genesis 2, we read that God formed a man from the dust and breathed life into him, and he became a living soul. And that's the first mention of the word soul in the King James Bible. And I absolutely love this because we have two good things. We have the dust, which is matter, and we have God's breath, which is spirit. And both are affirmed in that sentence. Often we pitch them against each other in our spirituality, don't we? We say the flesh is not good and spirit is all good. But actually these two are affirmed, and yet they're held in the creative tension which creates something greater than the sum of the parts, which is soul. And that's why for me, soul is what connects us always to what's greater than the sum of the parts, to the more that there must be to life. And in the book I explore three ways in particular that soul does that. Let me mention those briefly. First, soul speaks to and opens us to and connects us with the more of who we were created to be uniquely and individually, trailing clouds of glory as we remembered. The soul, as Bill Plotkin, the depth psychologist, puts it, calls to us from our subterranean depths, pushing up like a flower that grows through the cracks in the concrete paving of our lives. Now, sometimes it's easier to imagine how we've paved over our soulfulness than what the flower might be. But actually, so you might go away and think, how have I paved over my soulfulness? What are the cracks and what are the flowers? When was the last time you met your true self? Second, soul opens us and connects us with the more of how we relate to God, to each other, to creation, to ourselves. Soul to soul, not ego to ego. Or as the psalmist writes, as deep calls unto deep. Rowan Williams once said that we are not consumers of this world, we are in communion with it. And that is crucial. We are in communion with this world. Good old John O'Donoghue speaks of God as our soul friend. So that book I held up, Anam Cara, that's the Gaelic phrase for soul friend. And he says that at the heart of life, we have the opportunity to have a soul friendship with God. At the very depths of who we are, there is a soul friendship between our true self and between God. And imagine how differently we might live life if instead of being braced defensively in a universe in which we feel embattled, instead we live life as if we are able to have a soul friendship with God, with ourselves, with creation, with the world around us. Imagine what difference it would make. And third, then, soul opens us up to the more of our life's work, whether that is paid or unpaid, and which, instead of becoming all about massaging the ego, as so many of our careers end up being about, can manifest the soul instead. I wonder, how do you touch the world through your life's work in only the way that you can touch the world? As the filmmaker Robert Bresson once said, make visible that which without you might perhaps never be seen. The Lebanese poet and artist Khalil Gibran once said that work is love made visible. And believe it or not, people are now beginning to talk about organizations being soulful. There's a guy called Frederick Laloux who's written a book called Reinventing Organizations. And he's saying that we are undergoing a paradigm shift. And the paradigm is all about a shift in the hearts of leaders and organizations from ego to soul. And we should have a head start on that. It's really, really exciting as we seek to play our part in an unfolding culture. But I think the thing that I love most about soul is that it has to be fleshed out. The word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood, as we read in the Message version of John's prologue. Spirituality so often seems to be about escape, about maybe wafting away on a plume of spiritual incense, but soulfulness is about the embrace of life. It's spirit which is earthed in matter, and matter which is enlivened by spirit. So when we follow Jesus, it's not about avoiding our broken world, but finding a vivid and compassionate and soulful way back in to embrace it. And here's the thing, soul speaks most eloquently of the very heights and depths of who we are, of that more, and yet it is fleshed out in those beautiful, simple, soulful moments, such as the meal you share with friends, or gathering around a crackling fire on a wintry night and just roasting some marshmallows, or playing music in a local pub, or gathering on a day like today, or in a warm embrace, or even in unexpected tears. Soulfulness is no three-point plan for the perfect life. And what I've found so often is that it's the people who have experienced true loss and have faced into that loss and have accepted that the shiny shell of their exterior of their life is cracking open. It's those people who seem to have somehow the most profound and soulful connection to the more. People like my friend Howard, who lost his daughter aged 4 and walks with a limp, and yet has done some of the most soulful work in setting up academy schools and just really inspiring so many people around him. Or my friend Linda, who had a very impressive job at one of the biggest NGOs in the country and was made redundant, and instead of just thinking, I need to get another job like that, listened to a nudge within her to follow what she had always loved the most, which was baking. And she now runs a gorgeous cafe where people can meet and drink and eat and share in soulful space together. As the writer Christine Kane puts it, sometimes when you're in a dark place, you think you've been buried, but you've actually been planted. The Last Supper, despite the deepness of its pain, was surely, truly soulful. A meal with friends in which Jesus washes feet, breaks bread, shares wine. It's spiritual with cosmic significance, yet it's earthed in the physical and creates something immeasurably more than the sum of both, something that we can still participate in today in the Eucharist. It still touches our soul. How about after the resurrection when Jesus prepares a charcoal fire with his own nail-scarred hands on a beach at sunrise and cooks fish for his friends? It does not get much more soulful than that, does it? Imagine the smell, the taste, the feeling of the air. And exquisitely, those followers, those friends of him, sample the taste of both fish and forgiveness, all interwoven. And Peter in particular has his soul restored. The way of soul follows the path of descent, as Jesus did. Or just as an autumnal acorn must, which must fall to the ground to have any hope of becoming a mighty oak. We may obsess about polishing the shiny surface of our life, but it is through the cracks that the light gets in and the soul flows, grows out. Jesus said, "What does it profit anyone to gain the whole world yet lose their soul?" And I think that's a line that is so important for today's ego-driven world. What does it profit anyone to gain the world but lose their soul? What if this world was never ours to gain anyway, but instead a place in which we could help each other to reconnect as deep calls unto deep, and as soul calls unto soul. A divine taste, a foretaste of the soulful flavors of fish and forgiveness, and so much more of the kingdom of God. Because there must be more to life, mustn't there? And deeper down, I think we know it. Thank you.